So I've come to Chambers Street Museum and I'm just catching a little bit of a video here of an Egyptian potter. Really fabulous footage of these hands at work. And I'm hoping that it's going to be a useful starting point for our next theme, which I'm calling Working Hands. I would like it to be an opportunity for me to work with you on drawing and painting hands, not only hands, but tackling the business of articulating fingers, making hands believable, but also including that aspect in some kind of composition. So as well as what's in this great video, there are plenty of artifacts around this part of the museum which are objects which have either been made by hand or have been or would be used, held in hands. And given it's the museum, there are just any number of beautiful artifacts from ancient civilizations through to contemporary objects. So we'll begin at the museum, and I'll be encouraging you to collect a range of sketches of different artifacts, and perhaps encourage you to imagine how hands and maybe more than hands, more of a figure, can relate to those objects. And then for the next bit of this video demonstration, video prompt, I'm going to do some drawing with a model, a friend or a family member, probably knitting, I'm guessing, but I'm going to do some demonstration drawing of working hands. And then we'll be in the museum for the first week, and the following week we'll be in the studio with a model who will have hands. Okay, so here we have some working hands. Inez is doing some knitting, and I'm going to ask her to pause, and I'm going to do some kind of diagrammatic sketches of her hands as to get you started on this whole business of the theme of working hands. So can you stop there, Inez? Great. So with the hand on the left, we've got I'm going to draw the curve of the cuff first, because when you draw hands, it's good to start with the wrist, which is narrow here, and then I'm going to come straight out to the knuckle. I'm doing a curving line for the knuckle. So that's the wrist across there. I could do a line if I want to break the hand into those parts. And then I'm going to do a kind of outline of the basic shape that the fingers make, which is something like that. And if I want to draw individual fingers, I can draw some lines from the knuckle, or starting just beyond the knuckle. There's the first finger there, the middle finger here. I'm going out to the limit of that outline that I did. Then that's actually a slightly longer finger there, and then we've got a small finger there. And it just means that these fingers will come from the knuckle, and they will be organized in that way. Now there's other things I could do to this hand to maybe make it a little bit less diagrammatic. So with my eyes half closed, I can see there's shadow here on this half of the back of the hand, and on those fingers, maybe kind of dividing that finger in half and dividing this finger in half. So I've got my basic structure from the wrist to the knuckle, and then I've got each of these fingers that I've now modelled a little bit. Not quite on screen. But then, having got that basic structure, maybe I'll just go back and add a little bit more emphasis. And that might be to get the division between the fingers, perhaps, or maybe there's something with this finger there that should be a bit longer. And of course these fingers are doing something, so I probably ought to explain. There's a bit more of an angle to that. I should explain that with, I know this is now off screen, but the wool that's between those fingers. So I'll just pause and we'll set up another one. So we've got a new position now on the hand to the right, and this time we can see the thumb. So I'll go through the same steps. It's slightly distorted on the screen, I can see, but I'm starting as ever with the cuff, and there's a little bit of wrist here, but we come almost immediately to the knuckle, which is that I'm describing with that line there. The shape of the fingers then, I suppose, basically are something like that. I'm only seeing, I think, only 2 fingers. So that's going there to there. So as I say, that's the wrist, that's the knuckle. And if I want to then put fingers in, the fingers that I can see, that's the first one coming around there, and a bit of a second one there. But what we're getting this time is a view of the thumb, and I want to explain how the thumb is actually on a kind of hinge. So I'm putting in a triangle there just to indicate where the thumb is connected to the rest of the hand, and then I'm going to draw the thumb from that as a separate shape. So I don't know if that makes sense there, that there is this plane here which can either be going across the way it is now, or could you lift that thumb up, Inez?
That one?
Yeah, you can put it down again. Sorry, that didn't quite explain it. Never mind. So I'm putting a nail on just to give the thumb some direction, and as I did with the previous one, I think I should put on a pattern of tone to model those fingers a bit more, and they might even get a little bit lost in that. And we've got a dark shape in the middle, which is probably worth putting in too. So often as you're trying to explain or describe hands, it can be some of the negative shapes or some of the emphasis. So I'm going to put a bit more emphasis back in those fingers to bring that together, and of course back here as well. Things are a little bit darker. So that's really to try and repeat the sequence I described with the first hand that I did. Wrist, knuckle, and try and find a line for the knuckle, shape for the fingers, and then do the thumb last. So we might just have one more, which I could do your other hand, Inez. I'll pause and move. Okay, so I'll try the other hand. We've got it a bit more visible now, starting with the cuff. So you can see it's narrow across the wrist. I could put a mark where the wrist is, but it's quite clear. You can see that the hand broadens at the knuckle, and that's the kind of curve of the knuckle. The shape of the fingers, I keep going off screen anyway. So the shape of the fingers outlined a bit like that, so that if I want to do individual fingers, and that's important, I think, for what we're doing, for what Inez is doing with the wool, sort of dividing the wool, parting the wool like that. The thumb, I haven't done this side of the hand because I want to show you that triangular plane that the thumb is on, and the thumb is running not quite parallel with the first finger. It's a bit long, I think, so that first finger needs to be longer, but that's going to go off the screen. So wrist, knuckle, finger shape, and then treating the thumb last of all. So again, I want to turn these from diagrams into something a bit more modelled, a bit more 3D. And so some of that shading helps. I can smudge that a bit. I haven't done any subtracting with an eraser, which would be quite good as I refine. Bring that on screen a bit more. There we go. And as I was saying, it's often the sort of last bits of emphasis that you might put in adding some of those accents, dark marks. I mean, here the gap between the thumb and the first finger, or the line dividing the thumb from the first finger, some of the darker marks, and then I might do some subtracting with the eraser, because it would be quite good to get some of those knuckles as well. Eraser there, might be able to get a little bit of light off that knuckle. So what you often do towards the end in refining a hand will, you know, probably significantly change it from a bad hand to a good hand. But I want to hang on to that curved knuckle, because that's what that hand is doing sort of more significantly. We've got some nice bits of wool. And as I said, you know, the negative shape of whatever is being held or worked with may be part of the solution to make the hand come together or stand out. Okay, maybe just one more position. I'll pause.
I'm definitely not in it, right?
No. Okay, so this is an unfeasible knitting position, but I just wanted to get, well, just one more demonstration. Cuff. So here is the knuckle and the finger shape coming off there. And so this, you know, from the wrist to the knuckle, that's a bit more foreshortened. The thumb is coming off there, just a slight raise, and it's not what knitters do, but, and that's how long that finger is. I shouldn't make that too long. So the thumb is coming off there. So those are my basic, you know, parts: wrist, knuckle, finger shape, and then thumb last. So let's make a better job of this one. And I really want to get the bend of the fingers, so that the fingers are in that plane, turning away at the knuckle. But actually there's quite a pattern of shadow halfway up the hand here as well. And then half of the thumb is in shadow too. So there's a certain amount of form in that. What's difficult here is that this finger is really coming towards us, and it is slightly distorted on the camera. I meant to say, with fingers, I think it's good advice to make them slightly pointy. Then they look less like sausages, and also it gives them direction. And to make that finger really come towards us, I've probably got to show that there's a bit of a tip to the finger before the nail, before we see the nail. I don't think that's quite doing it in the drawing. And the thumb, as I've been saying, added on that extra hinge, but pointing out. So there we go. I think that's more or less it. But in order to really make this bend at the knuckle, I think I need to be doing something a bit more, maybe finding that line a bit, and perhaps showing that that's coming right out towards us. So the arm's actually down there. Okay, right. Thank you. Thank you, Inez. So that's just a few examples with that sequence of wrist, knuckle, finger shape and thumb. And hopefully that will be a useful introduction for when you start putting these artifacts that you're going to draw at the museum into hands.